Jason Statham stepped directly into Steven Seagal's path, chest forward, jaw locked, blocking the bigger man from walking away. Seagal's hand came up instinctively, and every crew member on that set stopped breathing. What happened in the next 45 seconds would become Hollywood legend, a story whispered about for decades. Jason Statham grabbed Steven Seagal by the front of his black silk shirt and shoved him backward into a stack of lighting equipment. The crash was loud enough to freeze every single person on that soundstage. What happened in the next 45 seconds would become Hollywood legend, a story whispered about for decades by stunt coordinators, grip operators, and A-list actors who still lower their voices when they tell it. But we gotta rewind. Not far. Just enough so you understand why a guy like Statham, a man who calculated every move he ever made, finally snapped on a guy twice his size. It was 2003. Statham was on a studio lot in Los Angeles shooting a fight sequence for a project that never made it to theaters. You don't know the name. Nobody does. The production collapsed 3 weeks later, and most people assumed it died because of budget problems. Believe me, the budget wasn't the problem. Seagal was there as a consultant. That was the official title. Unofficial title was something closer to the guy who shows up, tells everyone they're doing it wrong, and then demonstrates moves on people who didn't volunteer. He'd been brought in by one of the producers, a guy who owed Seagal a favor from the early 90s when Seagal's name on a poster still meant something overseas. The deal was simple. Seagal would help choreograph a few hand-to-hand sequences, collect a paycheck, maybe get a cameo. Easy money. Should have been smooth. It was not smooth. Statham had been doing his own stunts since the first Transporter film. He'd trained as a diver on the British national team, competed at the Commonwealth Games, and had spent years studying multiple martial arts. Wing Chun, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, kickboxing. The man could actually fight. Not movie fight. Fight. The kind where you wake up the next morning checking your teeth with your tongue. Seagal walked onto that set like he owned every square foot of concrete. He had 2 assistants trailing him, both wearing matching black jackets, and he moved with that slow, deliberate walk he always did. Chin up, eyes half closed. The energy of a man who believed the entire world was a few steps behind his level of understanding. The first hour went fine. Seagal watched the stunt team run through a hallway fight sequence. He nodded a few times, said nothing. Then the director called a break, and Seagal walked over to the lead stunt coordinator, a veteran named Danny Wheeler, and started talking. Get this, he didn't suggest changes. He dismantled the entire sequence, told Wheeler the footwork was amateur, told him the strikes lacked terminal energy, which is a phrase Seagal made up on the spot. Then he grabbed one of the younger stunt guys by the wrist and twisted it into a lock so fast the kid yelped. That's how you sell a technique, Seagal said, still holding the kid's wrist. You commit to the contact. Wheeler looked at the kid, looked at Seagal, and said nothing. He'd been in the business 30 years. He knew the math. Seagal was attached to a producer. Producers sign checks. You don't argue with checks. But Statham was standing 12 feet away. He'd seen the whole thing. And here's what nobody tells you about Jason Statham. The man doesn't fume. He doesn't pace around or mutter under his breath. He goes still, completely dangerously still. His jaw locked. His hands dropped to his sides. He watched Seagal release the kid's wrist, and he watched the kid shake out his hand with a grimace he was trying to hide. Statham walked over, not fast, measured. Every step deliberate. You all right? He said to the stunt kid. The kid nodded, rubbing his wrist. Yeah, fine, just caught me off guard. Statham turned to Seagal. Maybe ask next time before you crank someone's joint. Seagal looked at him, that heavy-lidded gaze he used in every movie, the one that was supposed to communicate ancient wisdom but mostly communicated that he was bored. I was demonstrating proper technique. The kid needs to learn how real contact works. Statham didn't blink. He took one step closer. He's a professional stunt performer. He knows how contact works. Seagal's mouth twitched. One of his assistants shifted his weight. The air on that soundstage changed temperature. You're welcome to show me your way, Seagal said. And then he added, with just enough condescension to make it sting, if you think you have one. Statham's eyes narrowed by a fraction. That was it. No dramatic reaction. Just a fraction of movement that told every single person watching that a line had just been sprayed with gasoline. Wheeler stepped between them, hands up, doing what stunt coordinators have done since the silent film era, de-escalating. "All right, let's take 15, everyone. Coffee's in the back." Statham turned and walked to the other side of the stage. He picked up a water bottle, drank from it, and set it down without looking at anyone. "I swear this happened. 3 different crew members told this exact detail the same way." He set the bottle down so gently it didn't make a sound. That's when they knew something was coming. During the break, Seagal didn't leave the floor. He stayed near the mats, talking to one of his assistants, demonstrating wrist locks in the air. He was performing. That's what guys like Seagal did. Every room was an audition for a role nobody had offered him. Meanwhile, Statham made a phone call outside the stage door. Nobody heard the conversation. But when he came back in, his energy was different, settled, like a decision had been made and filed. The afternoon session started with a new sequence. Statham was supposed to fight 2 attackers in a warehouse corridor. Standard stuff. Attacker comes from the left, Statham blocks, counters, throws the guy into the wall. Second attacker from behind, Statham spins, elbow strike, takedown. They'd rehearsed it 4 times that morning. It was clean. Seagal stopped the first take. "Hold on," he said, stepping onto the mat without being invited. "This doesn't work." The director, a guy named Paul, who had exactly 0 desire to be in the middle of this, looked at his DP and exhaled. "What's the issue?" "The blocking is wrong," Seagal said. He pointed at Statham. "You're throwing a right cross here, but in a real confrontation the body wouldn't rotate that way. You'd get caught with a counter before your hand comes back." Here's the thing you gotta understand. Statham's technique was correct. Biomechanically, martially, cinematically. He'd trained the sequence with a Muay Thai specialist that morning. His body rotation was textbook. But Seagal wasn't critiquing technique. He was asserting dominance. There's a difference, and everyone on that set knew it. Statham looked at the director. "Paul, are we good with the choreography?" Paul nodded. "We're good, let's run it." But Seagal didn't move off the mat. He stood there, feet planted, like he'd been bolted to the concrete underneath. "Let me show you something," Seagal said, and he reached for Statham's right arm. That's when it happened. Statham didn't let the hand land. He caught Seagal's wrist mid-reach, not a grab, a redirect. He used the momentum to pull Seagal forward, off balance, and then he planted his other hand flat on Seagal's chest and shoved. Hard. Seagal went backward. His feet tangled in a cable. He hit the lighting rig with his shoulder, and the whole assembly went over with a metallic bang that cracked across the stage. 2 C-stands toppled. A gel frame shattered on the floor. One of the assistants lunged forward to help Seagal, but Seagal pushed him away, face dark with something between humiliation and fury. The entire set went silent. Not movie silent, real silent. The kind where you can hear the building's ventilation system humming 3 floors up. Seagal got to his feet. He was big. People forget that. 6'4", well over 250 pounds at that point, and despite what everyone said about his conditioning, he could move when he wanted to. He squared up to Statham, shoulders forward, hands floating at his waist in that open palm stance he'd built a whole career on. "You want to go?" Seagal said. His voice had dropped. No more lecturing. This was primal. Statham stood exactly where he was, feet shoulder-width apart, weight on his back leg. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't adopt a stance. He just stood there, balanced and ready, and said 7 words that cut through everything. "I'll go as far as you want. Now listen to me. This is the moment. Right here." Because in that sentence, Statham did something Seagal had never encountered in his entire career. He called the bluff. Every set Seagal had ever walked onto, every dojo, every soundstage, the dynamic was the same. Seagal would project authority, and people would yield. Not because he could necessarily back it up, but because the cost of finding out wasn't worth it. You let the big man have his moment, you cash your check, you go home. Statham wasn't cashing anything. He was standing there telling Steven Seagal point blank that if this went physical, he was ready to see it through. And the terrifying thing, the thing that changed the temperature in that building, was that everyone watching knew Statham meant it. This wasn't a bluff returned with a bigger bluff. This was a man who had trained his body into a weapon, saying, "I will use what I have. Trust me on this." What happened next is why this story survived for 20 years. Seagal didn't move. For 3 full seconds he stood in that open stance, hands floating, staring at Statham. Then something shifted in his face. The muscles around his eyes changed, his jaw loosened, and he took 1 step back. 1 step. In martial arts, 1 step back means everything. It's concession. It's acknowledgement. It's the body admitting what the mouth never will. Wheeler was there instantly, professional to his bones. All right, let's reset the rig, get these lights back up, we're losing the day. People started moving. Grips picked up the fallen C-stands. Someone swept up the broken gel frame. The director pretended to study his shot list. The machine of film production churned back to life, because that's what it does. It absorbs conflict and converts it into schedule pressure. Seagal walked to the edge of the set. He stood there for a moment, touching his shoulder where he'd hit the rig. And here's where the story gets complicated, because Seagal did something nobody expected. He turned to the young stunt kid from earlier, the one whose wrist he'd cranked, and he said quietly enough that only a few people heard, "I shouldn't have grabbed you like that. That was out of line." The kid blinked, nodded, didn't know what to do with it. No, seriously, that actually happened. Multiple people confirmed it. In the middle of the worst on-set confrontation of his career, Steven Seagal apologized to the one person who had nothing to do with the power struggle. Make of that what you will. Maybe something about getting physically checked opened a door he usually kept welded shut. Maybe he saw himself in that kid, back when he was young and people put hands on him without asking. Nobody knows. He never explained it. But the apology didn't extend to Statham. Not then. Not ever. The rest of that day was ice. Seagal stayed on one side of the stage. Statham worked on the other. They shot 2 more sequences without speaking to each other. The director kept his head down and burned through setups as fast as humanly possible. By 6 o'clock, the day was wrapped. Statham left first. He walked out the stage door, got into a black Range Rover, and drove off the lot. No goodbye to the crew. No wrap-up conversation with the director. Just gone. Seagal left 20 minutes later. His 2 assistants carried his bag to a black Escalade, and the 3 of them disappeared into the Los Angeles evening. Now here's where it gets really interesting. You'd think that would be the end of it. 2 alpha males had a confrontation, 1 backed down, everybody moves on. But Hollywood doesn't work that way. Hollywood is a small town disguised as a big city, and information travels through it faster than light through fiber optic cable. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Not on the internet. This was 2003. The internet existed, but it wasn't the gossip delivery system it is now. No, this story moved the old-fashioned way. Phone calls, breakfast meetings at the Chateau Marmont, whispered conversations in agency mailrooms. The kid who answers phones at CAA tells the kid who answers phones at William Morris, who tells an assistant at a production company, who tells a development executive, who tells an actor at a table read. By the time a week had passed, half of Hollywood knew that Jason Statham had physically put Steven Seagal on his back on a soundstage. And the details grew. Isn't that always how it works? Some versions had Statham throwing a punch. Some had Seagal pulling a knife. One version, and I cannot believe this one got traction, had Statham performing a judo throw so clean that Seagal's feet went over his head. None of that happened. What I told you is what happened. A shove, a crash, a 7-word sentence, and 1 step back. But the truth didn't matter as much as the narrative, and the narrative was devastating for Seagal. See, you gotta understand where Seagal was in 2003. He hadn't had a theatrical hit in years. His movies were going straight to video. The Under Siege days were ancient history. He'd gained weight. His movement on screen had slowed. The mystique that had built his career, the idea that Steven Seagal was a legitimate, deadly martial artist, was already cracking. And now here was this story, spreading through the industry, about a younger, faster, more credible action star literally putting him on the ground. It was a confirmation of everything people already suspected. And in Hollywood, confirmation is a death sentence. Statham's career, meanwhile, was a rocket. The transporter had hit big. The Italian Job had shown he could do ensemble work. Guy Ritchie was talking about another project. The Expendables was still years away, but the trajectory was clear. Statham was the future of the action genre, and Seagal was the past. Now mark my words. The confrontation on that set didn't end Seagal's career. His career was already ending, but it accelerated something. It shifted the way Hollywood talked about him. Before that day, people said Seagal was difficult. After that day, people said Seagal was finished. There's a difference between difficult and finished, and the distance between them is exactly one shove and one step backward. In the weeks that followed, Seagal's manager tried to do damage control. He called 3 different producers and told them the story was exaggerated. He said Seagal and Statham had a creative disagreement that was resolved professionally. Nobody bought it. You don't get professional resolution by falling into a lighting rig. The production itself collapsed 3 weeks after the incident. The official reason was financing. The real reason was that the director, Paul, walked away. He told the producers he couldn't work in an environment where talent was physically confronting each other on his set. The insurance company had already flagged the incident. When the director left, the money left. When the money left, the project died. There's a footnote here that matters. Wheeler, the stunt coordinator, worked with Statham on 3 more films after that. Never worked with Seagal again. When someone asked him about the incident years later at a stunt industry event, Wheeler said only one thing: "I've worked with a lot of tough guys. Most of them are performing. A few of them aren't." He didn't say which category Statham fell into. He didn't have to. Here's what's wild. Statham never talked about it publicly. Not once. No interviews. No late-night show anecdotes. No subtle references in press junkets. And this is crucial, because in Hollywood, the person who doesn't talk about a conflict is the person who won it. The winner doesn't need to narrate his victory. The loser is the one who keeps explaining. And Seagal explained. Over the years, in various interviews and appearances, he made references to guys in the industry who don't understand real martial arts. He talked about how some of these action guys are just athletes. They don't have the spiritual foundation. He talked about how his Aikido training gave him an understanding of combat that these MMA-style guys would never grasp. He never said Statham's name. He never had to. Everyone knew who he was talking about. But here's the thing he never addressed: the step backward. He never explained why, in the moment of truth, when a man 8 inches shorter and 60 pounds lighter stood in front of him and said, "I'll go as far as you want," he chose to retreat. Because addressing it would mean admitting it happened, and admitting it happened would mean admitting what it meant. Let me tell you what it meant. It meant the era of the untouchable action star was over. For 20 years, guys like Seagal had coasted on mystique, on the idea that their on-screen abilities were just a fraction of what they could really do, on the suggestion that they were too dangerous for real combat because they might actually hurt someone. It was an incredible con, and it worked because nobody with any credibility ever called it. Statham called it. Not with a speech, not with a YouTube video or a podcast rant. With his hands and his feet and 7 words. The ripple effects went further than most people realize. After the story spread, other action stars started being more selective about who they let on their sets. Stunt coordinators got more authority to push back against ego-driven consultants. There was an actual, measurable shift in how fight choreography was developed for major action films in the mid-2000s. More athletic, more grounded, less mystical hand-waving, and more practical, testable technique. You can draw a straight line from what happened on that soundstage to the fight choreography in the Bourne films, in the John Wick franchise, in everything that came after. I'm not saying Statham caused all of that, but the confrontation was part of a larger current, and it pushed the water in a direction it was already flowing. By the way, the stunt kid, the one Seagal apologized to, his name was Marcus Vega. He went on to become one of the most respected stunt performers in the business. He coordinated fights for 3 Marvel films. He trained 2 Oscar-winning actors in hand-to-hand combat for roles that defined their careers. And every time someone asked him about the Seagal incident, he said the same thing. "He hurt my wrist, but he also said sorry. That's more than most people in this business do." That's grace. You don't find much of it in Hollywood, but when you do, you remember it. Now let me bring this home. Because the real question isn't what happened on that set. You know what happened. Statham confronted Seagal. Seagal backed down. The story spread. Careers continued on their respective trajectories, one up, one down. The real question is why it mattered. And it mattered because of what it revealed about power. Power in Hollywood, and honestly power everywhere, is built on perception. It's built on the idea that certain people are untouchable, that challenging them carries consequences too severe to risk. Seagal had built 30 years of career on that perception. He walked onto sets and into dojos and through the world wrapped in an aura that said, "I am beyond your ability to challenge." Statham stripped it away in 45 seconds. Not because he was bigger, he wasn't. Not because he was meaner, he wasn't that either. But because he was willing. Willing to find out what was real and what was performance. Willing to absorb whatever consequence came from the finding out. And that willingness, that absolute readiness to see it through, was something Seagal had never encountered because nobody had ever been willing before. You want to know the craziest part? They saw each other again. Once. 2007. An industry event in Las Vegas. Some kind of action film expo. Both were there for separate appearances. They ended up in the same green room for about 11 minutes. A production assistant who was in the room told me exactly what happened. Statham was sitting in a chair, drinking coffee, reading something on his phone. Seagal walked in, saw him, and stopped. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Seagal nodded. Just a nod. And Statham nodded back. That was it. 11 minutes of silence and one exchange of nods. The production assistant said it was the most tense 11 minutes of her life, but also the most civil. Two men who had touched the edge of real violence, acknowledging each other without either needing to relitigate what had already been settled. Because it was settled. It had been settled on that soundstage 4 years earlier, in the space between a shove and a step back. If you've made it this far in this story, you're the kind of person who understands that real power isn't loud. Hit subscribe. I tell stories like this every week, stories the industry doesn't put in press releases. Now, let me finish this. Statham went on to become the biggest action star of his generation. The Expendables, Crank, The Mechanic, Fast and Furious, Hobbs and Shaw. He built a career not on mystique but on visible, verifiable ability. He did his own stunts. He trained openly. He never claimed to be something he wasn't. And when people asked him what made a great action star, he always said the same thing. Respect the people around you. They're the ones making you look good. Seagal continued to make films, dozens of them. Straight to video, straight to streaming, straight to the bargain bin at gas stations. Some of them were watchable, most were not. He relocated to Russia, got involved in politics, and cultivated a persona so far removed from mainstream Hollywood that the two might as well have been on different planets. He still trained, he still wore the black silk, he still moved with that deliberate, heavy-lidded certainty. But after that day in 2003, something was different. The aura had a crack in it. And once an aura cracks, you can't seal it. You can paint over it, you can drape fabric across it, you can stand at an angle where it's hard to see. But it's there, and everyone who looks close enough can find it. The shape of that crack was exactly the width of Jason Statham's palm. Wheeler retired from stunt coordinating in 2019. At his retirement party, someone brought up the story. Wheeler shook his head and said, "I've seen 1,000 fights on sets. Most of them are ego. That one was something else. That one was clarification." Clarification. That's the right word. Because what Statham did on that soundstage wasn't violence. It was barely even confrontation. It was a question asked in the most direct way possible. Who are you when someone doesn't back down? Seagal's answer was one step backward. Statham's answer was 7 words. And both answers told you everything you ever needed to know about both men. That's the legend. Not a knockout. Not a brawl. Not a viral video of 2 action stars rolling around on a dirty soundstage floor. The legend is a shove, a crash, a sentence, and a step. The legend is the silence that followed, and the way it traveled through an industry that worships noise. Every time you see a fight scene in a modern action movie, one where the star actually moves with genuine ability, where the camera doesn't hide the performer's limitations behind quick cuts and shaky cam, you're seeing the echo of something that changed. The old gods of action cinema, the ones who built careers on suggestion and mystique, they gave way to a new generation that built careers on proof, on showing up, putting in the work, and standing in front of the camera with nothing to hide. Statham was the tip of that spear, and the moment that announced it to the world, even though the world didn't know it yet, happened on a sound stage in Los Angeles on a Tuesday afternoon in 2003, when one man grabbed another man's shirt and said, without any ambiguity, enough. The crew never talked about it on camera. The production company never issued a statement. The project it happened on doesn't even have an IMDb page anymore. But the story survived. It survived because real moments always do. They survive in the whispered conversations, in the nods between people who were there, in the retirement speeches and the late-night bar stories, and the careful pauses when someone asks, "What's the craziest thing you ever saw on a set?" What they saw was a legend being built in 45 seconds. And what they felt, standing there on that soundstage with broken gel frames under their feet and the hum of ventilation above their heads, was the precise moment when one era ended and another began. Statham never talked about it. He didn't need to. The 7 words said everything, and the silence he kept afterwards said even more. That's power, not the performance of power, not the wardrobe of power, or the entourage of power, or the slow walk and the half-closed eyes and the philosophical nonsense about spiritual foundations. Real power. The kind that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't have to. The kind that stands with its feet shoulder-width apart, weight on the back leg, and says with absolute calm, "I'll go as far as you want." One man said those words. One man took a step back, and Hollywood has never forgotten which was which.